They sat down expecting another tell-all, but this one felt different from the very first second because something had shifted. The smiles were forced, the pauses were heavier, and for the first time, no one was protecting the story anymore. What started as simple questions quickly exposed years of silence, hidden power, and decisions that may have changed the family forever. And by the end of this episode, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Nothing was falling apart by accident, and once you see it, you can never unsee it. Stay with me, because what comes next explains everything. Welcome back, everyone, because the moment this episode begins, something already feels different. The energy is heavier, the expressions are tighter, and the silence says more than words ever could. This is not just another tell-all. This is the moment where everything that has been buried starts clawing its way to the surface, and you can feel it before anyone even speaks, because when they sit down across from each other, there is history in every glance and tension in every pause, and the audience instantly knows this is not going to be comfortable, this is not going to be safe, and this is not going to be wrapped up neatly, because the truth does not arrive politely. It arrives when people are tired of pretending. And as soon as the conversation starts, you can sense that every single person is holding something back, not because they want to, but because they have been trained for years to stay quiet and smile through discomfort. But tonight, that training begins to crack. And when Robin speaks first, it becomes obvious almost immediately that her words do not land the way she intends them to, because even the smallest slip reveals something deeper. And when she mentions attitudes, plural, not singular, it opens a door no one expected, because suddenly it is not about one moment or one argument. It becomes about patterns, moods, cycles, unpredictability, and emotional exhaustion. And that single word shifts everything, because it quietly confirms what viewers have suspected for years, that living inside this family meant never knowing which version of the same man you were waking up to. And when that realization sinks in, it changes how every past scene now looks, because it explains the walking on eggshells, the nervous laughter, the over-explaining, the constant emotional negotiation. And suddenly, the tell-all stops being entertainment and starts feeling like a reckoning. And then we see how uncomfortable Cody looks, not relaxed, not confident, but restless, moving, touching, shifting, unable to sit still, like someone whose body knows something their mouth is not ready to say. And that physical discomfort becomes its own confession, because people who feel safe do not need to soothe themselves constantly. And the more he tries to appear calm, the more obvious it becomes that he is anything but. And that is when the dynamic flips, because for the first time, he is not controlling the conversation, he is reacting to it, and reaction always reveals more than intention ever could. And while the questions appear light at first, icebreakers, jokes, talents, laughter, underneath all of it is avoidance, because humor becomes a shield when accountability feels too close, and each attempt to keep things playful feels forced, because no one is really here to play games anymore. They are here because years of emotional confusion have finally boiled over, and every smile feels rehearsed, every laugh slightly delayed, and every joke lands just a little too hollow. And then the presence of Jen shifts the atmosphere entirely, because she is not bound by the same rules. She does not owe loyalty to the structure. She was not raised to protect the illusion, and that makes her dangerous. Not loud, not aggressive, just honest. And honesty in this family has always been the most threatening thing of all. And you can see it in how the room tightens when she speaks, because she does not soften the truth. She does not translate it into comfort. She simply names it, and naming things has consequences. And when she says she could blow up the world, everyone knows she is not exaggerating, because the real story has always lived in the spaces between what was said publicly and what was whispered privately. And that is where the real damage happened, and that is where the real power games lived. And suddenly, the audience realizes that the tell-all is not revealing new information, it is revealing how much information was never allowed to be spoken. And as the conversation moves toward apologies, something unsettling happens, because apologies without accountability feel less like healing and more like strategy. And when Cody offers his version of remorse, it feels carefully measured, not focused on impact but on optics. And the difference matters, because regret that centers the self is not the same as repair that centers the harm. And viewers can feel that disconnect immediately. And when Janelle's reactions come into focus, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore, because what she says privately does not always align with what she expresses publicly, and that inconsistency creates confusion until it becomes clear that she is processing in layers. Some people react instantly, others need time, and rage often comes later after clarity arrives. And that delayed reaction does not make it dishonest, it makes it human. And that is where the tell-all becomes powerful, because time has passed, emotions have settled, patterns have become visible, and now people are no longer reacting, they are reflecting. And reflection is far more dangerous because it cannot be dismissed as heat of the moment. And as the episode continues, every interaction feels like a chess move, because nothing is random. Every pause, every redirection, every attempt to change subject reveals what someone is trying not to say. And when the topic shifts to friendship, loyalty, and so-called games, it becomes clear that projection has been the real language of this family for years, because accusations often mirror behavior, and what gets labeled as manipulation often originates from the same place. And when Cody refers to girl games, the irony is almost overwhelming, because the structure itself was built on comparison, competition, and scarcity. And when people are placed into a system where affection is limited, rivalry is inevitable, and blaming the participants while ignoring the structure becomes the ultimate deflection. And the audience can feel that deflection happening in real time. And the more he speaks, the more it becomes clear that accountability has always been redirected outward, never inward. And that is why these conversations go in circles, because the starting point is never the same. And then Coyote Pass enters the conversation, and everything intensifies, because money removes sentiment and exposes intention. And suddenly, what once was framed as family vision now looks like leverage, and the language shifts from unity to compliance. And that single word, compliance, changes everything, because families do not require compliance, contracts do. And when land becomes conditional and silence becomes transactional, the emotional truth becomes unavoidable, because this was never just about property. It was about control and the possibility of withholding resources until obedience was restored. And that realization reframes years of tension, because financial power quietly replaced emotional connection. And when Mary refuses to sign the NDA, it becomes the most pivotal moment of the entire story, because for the first time, someone chooses voice over peace, truth over comfort, and autonomy over approval. And that choice disrupts everything, because silence was the glue holding the illusion together. And once silence breaks, the entire structure starts to tremble. And you can see how threatening that is to those who benefited from quiet compliance. And suddenly, the narrative shifts again, because Mary is no longer the obstacle. She becomes the mirror, reflecting what everyone else agreed not to see. And when she says she will not be silenced again, it is not dramatic. It is declarative, and declarations change trajectories because they signal permanence. And the audience realizes that this is not about revisiting the past anymore. This is about who gets to control the future. And as the episode closes, tension remains unresolved, because real life rarely wraps neatly, and the most powerful stories are not the ones with answers, but the ones that force the audience to sit with uncomfortable questions. And the final moments leave a sense of anticipation, not because of what was revealed, but because of what is clearly still being withheld. And that is the hook that keeps viewers watching. Not scandal, not outrage, but the feeling that the real truth is circling closer and closer. And when it finally lands, it will change everything. As the conversation deepens, the emotional undercurrent grows stronger because now the defenses are thinner and the fatigue is visible. And what becomes painfully clear is that this is not a family arguing, this is a group of people unpacking years of emotional survival strategies. And once survival mode is named, it cannot be unseen because suddenly every past reaction makes sense. The avoidance, the laughter, the minimization, the sudden shutdowns, none of it was random. It was adaptation. And adaptation is what happens when people learn that expressing needs leads to punishment or dismissal. And when that realization settles over the room, it reframes everything. Because this was never about personality clashes, it was about power imbalance. And when power remains unspoken, it becomes normalized. And that normalization is what allows harm to persist quietly. And as the tell-all continues, the contrast between how different wives process the same environment becomes striking, because each person coped differently. One withdrew, one rationalized, one tolerated, one complied. And none of those responses are failures, they are symptoms. And that distinction matters because it removes blame from individuals and places it where it belongs, on a system that rewarded silence and discouraged confrontation. And when Robin's role is examined, the conversation becomes especially complex because she exists at the intersection of belief and benefit. And that duality makes intent difficult to untangle because it is possible to genuinely believe in hierarchy while simultaneously profiting from it. And that overlap creates moral ambiguity. And ambiguity is uncomfortable because it resists simple villain narratives and instead forces the audience to confront something more unsettling, that harm can occur without malicious intent. And that makes accountability harder because good intentions do not erase impact. And when codependency is discussed, it opens another layer entirely because emotional reinforcement does not always look like agreement. Sometimes it looks like not intervening. Sometimes it looks like validating anger. Sometimes it looks like staying silent when silence protects comfort. And over time, those micro decisions accumulate into massive outcomes. And when the question becomes whether Robin knew the family was falling apart, the answer is not simple, because awareness does not always arrive as a realization. Sometimes it arrives as a feeling that something is wrong that gets pushed aside, because confronting it would require sacrifice, and sacrifice is the one thing the system never truly demanded from those at the top. And that imbalance eventually creates fracture, because resentment grows where responsibility does not. And when Christine and Janelle chose to leave, it was not impulsive, it was cumulative, the result of years of unmet needs and repeated invalidation. And when they finally walked away, it shattered the illusion that endurance equals loyalty. And that realization deeply unsettled those who remained, because it challenged the belief that suffering was proof of commitment. And once that belief collapses, the entire foundation trembles, and the conversation around Coyote Pass resurfaces again, because land represents permanence, legacy, something meant to bind them together long term. And yet, it became the very thing that exposed division, because decisions were not made collectively, transparency was absent, communication was selective, and when this season, because no one is pretending anymore. And when pretending stops, change becomes inevitable, whether welcomed or not. And the final moments leave viewers with a sense of unresolved truth lingering in the air, because there are still stories untold, still perspectives unheard, still emotions waiting to be validated. And that tension is not accidental, it is the natural result of honesty arriving late. And when honesty finally arrives, it does not whisper, it echoes. And those echoes will continue into every conversation that follows, because once silence breaks, it cannot be restored. And the audience feels it, the shift, the reckoning, the inevitability that something fundamental has already changed. And no matter what is said next, There is no returning to what once was. And that is what keeps viewers watching, not for drama, but for understanding. Because beneath every conflict is a question that still remains unanswered. Who was protected and who paid the price? And until that question is fully faced, the story is far from over. And when the cameras finally stopped rolling, the truth didn't disappear, it lingered. Because this tell-all wasn't about closure, it was about clarity. And once clarity arrives, there is no going back. The family didn't break in one moment, it broke slowly, quietly, and right in front of everyone. And now that the silence is gone, the real story is only